They spent $300,000 on Peter's wedding, my father said coldly. But Janet could die without this surgery, I pleaded, so I walked away from my family forever. If you ever believe that family is a foundation of strength, my experience might make you reconsider. I once trusted in family connections, but when my daughter needed help the most, my parents, the very ones who should have stood by me, prioritized social events and status instead. Now, after losing everything, they return, pleading for my assistance. But I am no longer the weak man I once was. My name is Brian, I'm 36 years old, and I run a small interior design business in Austin, Texas. I'm not wealthy, but I'm financially stable. I earn enough to provide for my wife and my 12-year-old daughter, Janet. I work hard to maintain a steady life. Not extravagant, but without the constant stress of making ends meet. Although my family doesn't belong to the upper class, my parents, Henry and Samantha, have always wanted to appear that way. They own a well-known family-run furniture store, not excessively rich, but comfortable enough to afford a large house, luxury cars, and frequent social gatherings. To them, success isn't about happiness, but about how others perceive them. I am the eldest child, and my younger brother, Peter, is 2 years younger than me. Even in childhood, I noticed the favoritism. If I achieved an A, my parents would acknowledge it as expected, but if Peter earned a B+, they would celebrate with cake. When I went to college, it was barely recognized, but when Peter did, they threw a big farewell party, even though he was only attending a local institution. Growing up in that environment, I quickly realized I couldn't depend on my family. I dedicated myself to my work, became independent, and built my own future from nothing. I never expected anything from my parents, but I could never have imagined the day they would choose a party over their granddaughter's life. After college, I secured a job at a small interior design firm in Austin as a design assistant. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. Every blueprint and every minor detail in a space gave me the joy of creating something meaningful. 2 years later, after gaining enough experience, I decided to branch out and start my own interior design business. It wasn't large, but it gave me the independence to pursue my passion. That was when I met Rebecca. It was a warm September afternoon, and I was managing my small furniture store, rearranging displays and checking inventory. She walked in looking for a reading chair. At first, I thought she was just another customer, but somehow we ended up talking for an hour about books, music, dreams, and unfinished plans. A year later, we were married. Then came Janet, a cheerful little girl with bright, sparkling eyes, just like her mother's. Rebecca and I believed nothing could shatter our happiness when Janet was born. We weren't rich, but we had enough. I ran my business, and Rebecca worked as a preschool teacher. Life was hectic, but fulfilling. However, we made one mistake. We overlooked health insurance. As a small business owner, I had no employer-sponsored coverage. Private insurance was costly, and since we were all healthy, we decided to delay it until we were more financially secure, a decision I would regret forever. Janet was always full of life, but 5 years ago, when she was 3, I noticed something was wrong. She developed a persistent cough at night. At first, Rebecca and I assumed it was just a cold, but as weeks passed, it worsened. She became weak, lost her appetite, had a fever that wouldn't go away, and would often pause while playing just to catch her breath. One afternoon, while Rebecca played with her in the living room, Janet suddenly collapsed. "Mommy, I'm so tired," she whispered. Rebecca panicked, scooped her up, and called me immediately. I rushed home to find Janet struggling to breathe, her eyes unfocused. Without hesitation, I carried her to the car and drove straight to the emergency room. When the doctor returned with the CT scan results, his expression was grim. "Brian, we have identified a congenital irregularity in Janet's lung. It is pressing against her airway, and she requires immediate surgery before the situation worsens." The ground beneath me felt like it had shattered. A lung mass in my 3-year-old child? How could this be real? But an even greater shock awaited me. The doctor guided me to the hospital's financial office, where I was handed a bill amounting to $120,000. "We can perform the surgery right away, but the hospital needs confirmation that the expenses will be covered. Do you have insurance?" I did not. At that moment, the weight of my mistake hit me. I had postponed getting insurance, foolishly assuming we wouldn't need it. Now my daughter was suffering because of that choice. Holding Rebecca's hand, I forced myself to stay composed. "We'll find the money. Just save my daughter." But how could I possibly gather $120,000 in such a short time? Despite everything, a small part of me still held on to hope that my parents would assist me. I didn't expect them to embrace me and promise to handle everything, but I thought they might offer some form of help. Janet was their granddaughter. How could they stand by, indifferent, when she was fighting for her life? With a heavy heart, I drove to their house. The moment I stepped inside, I realized they were hosting a grand celebration. The house was filled with guests, live music played, and elegantly dressed people sipped wine from crystal glasses. The air carried a mix of expensive perfume and gourmet cuisine. It was a party for Peter's upcoming wedding. While they rejoiced, I was desperate, pleading for my child's life. I walked up to my parents, struggling to remain calm. "Mom, Dad, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." My mother frowned, signaling for me to wait as she resumed chatting with the guests. I had to repeat myself, my voice now trembling. This time my father finally turned toward me, his expression irritated. "Brian, can't this wait?" I clenched my jaw, suppressing my anger. "Janet has a tumor in her lung. The doctors say she needs immediate surgery. If she doesn't receive it, she won't survive." I paused, anticipating their concern, for them to ask where she was, how bad it was, what the doctors had advised, but they remained silent. Not a single question about Janet's condition, not a flicker of worry. I swallowed the lump in my throat and continued. "The hospital requires $120,000 up front to proceed with the operation. I've exhausted all other options and can't secure that amount in time. Can you help? I don't need the entire sum, just enough to ensure the surgery isn't delayed." I waited, clinging to a sliver of hope. My mother placed her wine glass on the table and exhaled. "Brian, we've already finalized Peter's wedding arrangements. It's too late to postpone or cancel." I blinked, struggling to process what I had just heard. My father crossed his arms, his tone void of emotion, like a businessman calculating financial risks. "We've already spent $300,000 on Peter's wedding. If we give you that money, the wedding won't happen." A cold emptiness crept through me. They had spent $300,000 on an extravagant ceremony, yet wouldn't part with a fraction of it to save Janet's life. I turned to Peter, the younger brother I had always shielded, supported, and stood by. Dressed in a tailored suit, a champagne flute in hand, he stared at me as though I was an inconvenience. Swallowing my pride, I dropped to my knees in the middle of the crowded room. "Peter, please, just contribute a portion. I'll repay you. But Janet, she won't survive without this operation." I searched his face, hoping to find even the smallest trace of humanity. Instead, he took a step back, as if my presence was repulsive. Scoffing, he said, "You expect me to cancel my wedding over this? I have responsibilities. To my fiancée, to the future I'm building. I'm sorry, but I can't help." I stared at him in disbelief. I had just humbled myself before my own brother, and he mocked me for it. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some smirked, others shook their heads, watching me like I was a fool. My father placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Brian, stand up. Stop humiliating us." I slowly rose, but I no longer felt like their son. Looking them in the eyes, I spoke, my voice laced with bitterness. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Peter. Today I finally see who truly cares and who is merely a stranger." Without another word, I turned and walked away. Outside, rain poured heavily, drenching me instantly. But I felt nothing, just a hollow ache deep in my chest. I had begged, I had humbled myself, and in return I was met with cold indifference. I hurried to my car, slammed the door shut, and for the first time, I completely broke down. My sobs came in heavy waves, my hands gripping the steering wheel as grief choked me. The storm outside raged, mirroring the turmoil within me. Then, an image flashed in my mind. Janet. She was waiting for me. She was struggling to breathe, fighting to hold on. I couldn't fall apart now. Taking a deep breath, I wiped my tears, started the engine, and drove straight back to the hospital. By the time I arrived, my in-laws were already there. They weren't wealthy, just simple, hard-working people. The moment I stepped inside, my mother-in-law rushed to me, grabbing my hands tightly, her face full of concern. "Brian, you're soaked. Did your parents help?" I couldn't bring myself to speak, but she saw the answer in my eyes. My father-in-law placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "It's okay. We'll find a way." That night, Rebecca and I acted without hesitation. By morning, I began selling everything. My car, gone in an instant for $115,000. Our entire savings, emptied. Friends and coworkers pitched in, despite their own struggles. A young employee, barely making ends meet, pressed $500 into my palm. "Boss, this is all I can give." An old colleague I hadn't spoken to in years sent $3,000. "You once helped me. It's my turn." Every contribution counted, but I was still $40,000 short. Then, my phone rang. My in-laws. "Brian, how much more do you need?" my father-in-law asked, his voice firm. I swallowed hard. 40,000. Silence. Then my mother-in-law's voice came through, steady yet calm. "Come tomorrow, we have it." Stunned, I whispered, "Where did you get that much?" My father-in-law let out a small chuckle, warm yet resolute. "We sold our house. Janet's life matters more." I stood frozen, My own parents, with all their wealth, refused to spare a cent. Yet my in-laws, with no blood ties, gave up everything. Tears welled in my eyes. I don't know what to say. My father-in-law smiled gently. Just make sure Janet gets better. With their sacrifice, I had the full amount. Janet's surgery was successful. As the surgeon emerged from the operating room, he announced, "The surgery was a success. She will recover gradually." Overcome with relief, I collapsed into a chair, burying my face in my hands. Rebecca broke down in tears as my mother-in-law embraced her tightly. My father-in-law stood still, nodding as though he had never doubted this outcome. Reflecting on everything, I understood a powerful truth. Family isn't determined by blood, but by those who remain by your side in your darkest moments. That day, I vowed never to seek anything from my biological parents again. I had already found my true family. After the storm, the skies cleared as if fate had finally relented. 2 weeks later, Janet was released from the hospital. Every day, she regained her strength. As I wheeled her outside, she looked up at me with a radiant smile. "Daddy, I want to run and play again." I couldn't hold back my tears, tears of pure happiness. I pulled her close, feeling her steady heartbeat. Turning to Rebecca, I met her loving gaze. We had endured the worst, yet we had survived. A new chapter awaited us, but deep within, a fire still burned. I hadn't forgotten how I knelt before my own family, only to be cast aside, their cold indifference, Peter's arrogant smirk. They had dismissed me as insignificant. Now I would show them exactly who I was. Once Janet fully recovered, I threw myself into work, not just to survive, but to honor those who stood by me, and to prove I was never dependent on anyone's pity. Each morning, I rose at 5 a.m., pushing through 16-hour shifts, devouring everything about business, investments, and leadership. Interior design was just the start. I expanded into large-scale projects, designing hotels, shopping malls, and corporate buildings. No opportunity was too small. Countless sleepless nights, relentless deadlines, high-pressure negotiations. Every challenge only fueled my drive. Then, the breakthrough arrived. A year later, I secured my most significant deal, a $2 million contract with a leading real estate firm. 3 years later, my company had expanded fivefold. What started as a small business had evolved into one of the top interior design firms in the region. My name graced major business publications. From nothing to millionaire, Brian's rise from adversity. My parents had seen those headlines. They had watched me speak at high-profile business summits. But now, I was no longer their son in need. I was Brian, the entrepreneur who had rebuilt his life from nothing. A year ago, I was interviewed by Forbes after my company was ranked among the 50 fastest-growing firms. The journalist leaned in, intrigued. "What drove you to achieve this level of success?" I smiled, a knowing, bittersweet smile. Once I had a family who should have been my greatest support. But when I needed them most, they abandoned me. I begged them to help save my daughter's life. Their response? They had already spent their money on my brother's wedding. The journalist's eyes widened. They prioritized a wedding over saving their granddaughter's life? I nodded. That's exactly what happened. And for that, I thanked them. Their betrayal ignited a fire within me. Their cruelty drove me to prove I never needed them. I didn't soften my words. I didn't hide behind vague statements. I called them out by name. Henry and Samantha, my parents. Peter, my brother. Thank you for showing me that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by those who stand beside you when it truly matters. The interview aired, and the media erupted. Self-made millionaire reveals how his own family turned their backs on his dying daughter. Grandparents chose a wedding over their granddaughter's life. A shocking truth. When money matters more than family. A chilling tale of betrayal. My story spread like wildfire. Millions were furious. Unbelievable. How can people be so heartless? What kind of grandparents abandon their granddaughter in her time of need? Peter's wife must be regretting marrying a man who let his niece suffer for a party. But for my parents and Peter, this was just the beginning of their downfall. After the interview, their lives unraveled. Business partners severed ties, clients withdrew contracts, and former associates avoided them. The same people who once celebrated with them at extravagant parties now wanted nothing to do with them. My parents, once respected in their industry, were now outcasts. And Peter? He once looked down on me, thinking he had won with his lavish wedding and comfortable life. But everything changed. When his wife Ava saw my interview, she was horrified. "Peter, is this true?" he stuttered, scrambling for an explanation, but the truth couldn't be denied. Days later, Ava filed for divorce. She refused to stay with a man who let his own niece suffer for the sake of a celebration. Peter lost everything. Years ago, I had knelt before them, pleading for my daughter's life. They mocked me, as if she mattered less than their party. Now, the world had abandoned them, and I had no remorse. My success wasn't just a response to their betrayal, it was a tribute to those who stood by me. I returned to the people who had helped me, friends, colleagues, and employees who had given what little they had to save Janet. I gathered them all, offering financial support, paying off debts, and investing in their futures. But they declined. "Boss, we helped you because we believed in you, not because we wanted anything in return." I was speechless, overwhelmed with gratitude. These people were my real family. But one debt remained, the sacrifice my in-laws had made. They had sold their home without hesitation to save Janet. I couldn't let that go unanswered. Once Janet recovered, I spent a year tracking down the buyer of their house. I negotiated, made offers, and finally bought it back. The day I handed them the keys, my mother-in-law froze, tears in her eyes. "Brian, how?" I smiled. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. This is the least I can do." My father-in-law placed a firm hand on my shoulder, his gaze filled with pride. "I always knew you'd make it, son." That evening, we shared a true family dinner, something I hadn't felt in years. 5 years after Janet's hospitalization. As we prepared to welcome a new baby, I felt it was time for a fresh start. I purchased a larger house, not only for Rebecca, Janet, and our soon-to-arrive child, but also for my in-laws. They had provided me with a home when I had nothing, and now I wanted to ensure they lived without worry. Janet was ecstatic about having a sibling, but when she learned her grandparents would be moving in, she threw her arms around me. "Daddy, I'll see Grandma and Grandpa every day." I smiled, gently running my fingers through her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. They'll always be here with you." Seeing her happiness, I felt a sense of completion. Everything had come full circle. I never expected to hear from my parents again. But a month ago, while reviewing contracts in my office, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "Brian, it's Mom," a voice I hadn't heard in years. The same voice that had ignored my desperate pleas. Now it carried regret and desperation. Can you help us?" I remained silent. She exhaled shakily before continuing, her voice unsteady. "We mortgaged the house. The bank is about to seize it. We need $200,000. $200,000. Memories rushed back. The day I needed just $120,000 to save Janet's life. The moment I knelt before them, begging for their help, and they turned me away. My father's cold expression, Peter's arrogant smirk. Their belief that a wedding was more important than their granddaughter's survival. And now, they wanted my help? I inhaled deeply, keeping my voice steady. "Mom, do you recall the day I pleaded with you?" Silence. "I told you Janet's life depended on it. Do you remember?" Her voice cracked. "I do. Yet you refused. You let me walk away without hesitation." She began sobbing. "I know I was wrong, but please, Brian, we're desperate." A dry, humorless chuckle escaped my lips. "Let me ask you this, Mom. Between your house and a party, which is more important?" She didn't respond. I continued. "That day, you chose a celebration over saving Janet. And now, after losing everything, you expect me to choose to save you." Her cries grew louder. "But we're family. Family is supposed to help one another." I let out a bitter laugh. "No, Mom. My real family already did. My in-laws, my colleagues, and even strangers showed more kindness than my own parents." She tried once more, her voice filled with desperation. "You can't be this cruel." "Mom, I lost you and Dad the day you abandoned me and Janet." Without hesitation, I ended the call. That evening, after tucking Janet into bed, I sat in the living room and told Rebecca and my in-laws everything. I expected Rebecca to stand by my decision, but she simply held my hand and gazed at me thoughtfully. "Brian, I understand why you don't want to help, but maybe you should reconsider." I frowned. "Rebecca, they left our daughter to die. How can I just forget that?" She nodded, her eyes as gentle as ever. "I know, and I'm not saying you should forgive them, but do it for yourself, so you never have to live with regret." I turned to my in-laws, expecting their support, but my father-in-law remained calm and said, "Son, forgiving them isn't necessary, but choosing to help doesn't make you weak, it shows your strength." My mother-in-law added gently, "You have everything now, a loving family, a stable career, and a bright future. They, on the other hand, have lost everything. Helping them proves you've already won." I stayed silent, stepping onto the balcony. That night, I stood under the vast sky, lost in thought, replaying every painful memory. The moment I begged, the humiliation of kneeling before Peter, the way they turned their backs so easily. I had assumed turning them away would bring satisfaction, yet all I felt was emptiness. The next morning I called Mason, a close friend who specialized in finance. Mason, I need you to verify something. Are my parents really at risk of losing their house, or is this another deception? Give me 3 hours, he replied without hesitation. 3 hours later, his email arrived with confirmation. They were completely bankrupt. Their home had been mortgaged, and without $200,000, it would be seized. I exhaled deeply before dialing my mother's number. She answered immediately, her voice filled with desperation. Brian! I kept my tone firm. I'll help, but only under one condition. Anything, just tell me what you need. You and Dad must come to my office in person. I'll hand you the money directly. She hesitated briefly before responding quickly. All right, we'll be there. That afternoon I sat in my office, a black suitcase placed neatly on my desk. Inside, $200,000 in cash, precisely stacked. To me it was insignificant, but to them, it was their last hope of clinging to the life they once valued above all else. The door creaked open. My parents entered, stripped of the confidence and authority they once carried. My father appeared worn down, my mother's hair now streaked with silver. They took their seats across from me, eyes filled with silent pleading. Without a word, I unlatched the suitcase and flipped it open. 20 neat stacks of crisp $100 bills glowed under the office lights. My mother let out a quiet gasp. My father swallowed hard. I pushed the suitcase toward them. Here, enough to save your house. My father immediately snapped it shut, gripping it as if it were his lifeline. He nodded eagerly. Thank you, Brian. Now you finally understand the importance of family. A cold chuckle escaped me. No, Dad. Family is important. Just not this one. Their expressions froze. I leaned back, arms crossed. Do you know why I'm giving you this money today? My mother shook her head. My father remained silent. It's not out of sympathy. It's not to rebuild what's already broken. I just want you to understand this is the last time. I drummed my fingers on the desk, my tone sharp as ice. From this moment on, you are no longer a part of my world. The second you step out of this office, think of me as gone forever. My mother broke into sobs, while my father gripped the suitcase tightly, his face drained of color. Brian, please don't do this. We're still family. I let out a cold chuckle. You always prided yourself on being clever, didn't you? You always found a way to handle things. So go ahead, figure it out now. My father clenched his jaw. My mother wept uncontrollably. I felt nothing. I rose to my feet, cast them one final glance, and gestured to security. Show them out. The guards stepped forward, motioning for them to leave. Clutching the suitcase, they hesitated, speechless. As the door shut behind them, I knew this was the final chapter. They left with $200,000 but lost their last connection to me. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. No triumph, no resentment, just an ending. But I know they'll return. They've lost everything. I remain their only way out. Maybe in a year, maybe sooner. Perhaps Peter will reach out in desperation. They will try tears, false promises, every manipulation they can. Should I let them back in? What would you do? Was my choice justified? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you like stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Asterisk after listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind, or maybe it has brought back some old memories. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories, and they connect all of us. Everyone has their own unique journey in life, and we all try to understand the world in our own way. These kinds of moments remind us that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning something new. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback are always valuable to us, as they motivate us to create even better content. Every story has its own unique angle, and our goal is to understand everyone's perspective and make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like these help us realize that life's journey is different for everyone, and by hearing other stories, we learn something new. You can also share your own stories with us. Your experiences are valuable to us as well, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave your feedback. We aim to create content that brightens your mind and gives you new ideas every time. If you've already seen this video before, your feedback is still important. With every piece of feedback, we can improve our content and bring a new perspective to our viewers. Today, what we saw was just a small part of the many stories shared on Reddit and across the world. It's a reminder of how we all try to understand life by sharing our experiences with each other. This video was only an example of how we try to connect with others through storytelling, learning about different sides of life. We hope to continue sharing such stories that help us all learn and grow together. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon. If you haven't already, please like and follow for more amazing content. Your support keeps us going, and we will strive to bring you more thought-provoking and heartwarming stories. Until next time, take care and stay curious. Asterisk.